Chappell Roan is over fame, so let's talk about it. From a philosophical standpoint, of course. So recently, Kaylee Rose Amstutz, I'm probably butchering that, better known as Chappell Roan, her stage name, posted a TikTok that has a lot of the internet questioning whether or not she deserves to be a celebrity, and if she's actually really cut out for the reality of fame, considering what some are calling an ungrateful, if not naive, attitude towards fan expectations. Now, there's a lot to talk about here, but I think the question that we should be asking is not only whether or not she should expect a certain amount of sacrifice when it comes to her personal boundaries, being famous and whatnot, but why she should expect it. Meaning, why is the knee-jerk reaction for so many to blame Chappell Roan instead of the problematic nature of fame itself? Here's the thing. Even though we are becoming more cautious about posting our children on the internet, for example, especially in something like a bathing suit, because we're aware of the unfortunate reality of pedophiles, that doesn't mean that we just accept that behavior. You know, we take precautions that we know we really shouldn't have to take, but we don't accept that as an acceptable standard for society. As some people have pointed out, the negative response to Chappell Roan's latest statements about struggling with fame could be perceived as victim blaming, in the sense that they're saying, you should expect this when you're famous. You asked for this. Instead of acknowledging that perhaps Chappell Roan is indeed not cut out for fame, not because she's weak, but because she has a standard for boundaries that are realistically impossible to maintain. And the thing is, I've heard people ask, how is this any different than the boys will be boys attitude that only perpetuates problematic behavior, shifting culpability away from the perpetrators onto the victim? I think that's a good question. Why is society so comfortable just accepting, well, that's the way it is, as opposed to why is that the way it is? And I want to be really clear here that we're not comparing the experience of SA with the experience of being famous. We're identifying the problematic tendency, the pattern for society to shift the focus and the blame onto the person who's being violated by having their very personal boundaries being crossed, inferring that they're weak or naive, instead of questioning why we accept that to be normal in the first place. And honestly, I personally think that a big part of this has to do with the false assumption that many people, especially non-artists, make, which is that fame is often a byproduct of their art and not the goal or the objective. We could get into like a whole separate discussion about the types of artists that want to do it strictly for the fame, which often reflects in their work, by the way, and those that do it for like the joy or the need to create itself. But that false assumption, which again is also found in the disturbing explanations for, why men harass women, she wanted attention, why would she wear that, etc., never even considering the possibility that her outfit wasn't even specifically for validation of men, but because here's the thing, there are some people that literally cannot conceive of the difference between bragging and sharing when it comes to posting on social media. Even if they're like expressing sadness, it must be because they need attention, as opposed to maybe they just need help. And look, obviously to a certain extent, yes, all posting on social media is self-serving to a certain degree. In the same way, though, that doing anything altruistic for anyone is really self-serving to a certain degree because it makes you feel good. So does true altruism even really exist? That's probably a conversation for another time. But we assume that our individual take on the world is the canonically accepted standard one, right? And let me just remind you that things are inherently neutral in and of themselves until the context comes into play. That's what defines it. So, for example, somebody could say, I finally started posting on social media because I stopped caring what anybody thinks about me. I'm not going to be embarrassed about anything anymore. But they could also say, I finally stopped posting on social media because I stopped caring what anyone thinks of me and I don't need that validation. Both exist, and to assume that they don't is kind of naive. And look, regardless of how you feel about Chappell Roan, I do think that a lot of people talking about how ungrateful she is are being grossly reductive when it comes to the type of harassment that she's actually talking about. Being stalked, having your family stalked. Half of us avoid mere phone calls with people that we know, like half of us wait to take the garbage out until our neighbor is inside. So I just have a hard time believing that any of us would fare any better under such extreme circumstances. And I almost don't even want to bring that example up, because then we're getting into trying to quantify how much violation is an acceptable amount to continue to struggle with. But anyway, the reality is that even when it comes to polite autographs, selfies, pop stars don't owe you that either. And the transaction that they create, right, is a product. And if you like it, then you buy it or you stream it or whatever it may be. But the only reason that fans want FaceTime, selfies, autographs, those types of stuff, is because of who that artist is as an artist, right? So all of that is really icing on the cake. So it's ironic to me that so many are calling her entitled, when in all actuality, thinking that someone owes you more than the product that you paid for, and quite often didn't pay for, that's entitled to me. And the thing is, it's true. No one is making her be a celebrity. She could just stop, and honestly, she might. But also, no one is forcing you to support her. She doesn't owe you anything. Celebrities don't owe us anything. And this is where people will circle back with well, she at least owes us a little bit of gratitude for making her famous. And this is where we return to logic, because those are two separate, different things altogether. We're getting into positive and contrapositive arguments here. But just because she's expressing discontent for fans who don't take no for an answer doesn't automatically mean that she's expressing a lack of gratitude for the fans that do support her. Just because you hate sour things doesn't automatically mean that you love sweet things. These are assumptions that we're not even consciously aware that we're making half the time because of our tendency to fall into binary thinking. And the thing is, it's more than understandable, right? Realistically, that people would have this reaction to a person seemingly having so much when so many of us have so little. But that's what it's really about. It's not really about her, it's about them. So we end up tone policing very valid stances on situations because we're so blinded by this whole crabs in a bucket mentality of people in society that want others to experience the same amount of unfortunate standard of living under capitalism that they had to, meaning that even if you aren't famous yourself, there's still like this pervasive idea of, well, what did you expect? And if I was famous, I would be able to take it, or that's just the way it is. It's the way it's always been. And honestly, one could say, how crazy to complain about fame, right? When people are literally dying in the world, which is true, right? It seems kind of like a shitty default standard to hold everyone's life to that's more about finding an excuse not to proactively do anything to change it. But anyway, we can't simultaneously be posting think pieces on the fall of the mental health of so many 2000 celebrities while simultaneously invalidating them now that they speak up about how they struggle with fame. And lastly, I just have to add that the controversy around this to me is very indicative of how society often refuses to see celebrities as human, because one of the fundamental rights of a human, as annoying as this is to complain, even about stuff that's not important. Like, how many times do you complain about traffic or your job? And expecting people to only ever express positivity once they reach a certain level of celebrity is in and of itself dehumanizing them. That's exactly what you're doing. So for the people that disagree with me to the point of calling me weird, like I think you're so weird for like defending this. I think it's weird to get so triggered by a person that you don't even know, expressing valid frustration about experiencing a truly unfathomable life change that you will never come close to knowing, and thinking that someone owes you anything. Because again, we're not talking about blatant disrespect to fans, like a total insult to people that supported her. That's what Doja Cat did. There's a difference between that type of ugliness that Doja Cat expressed a long time ago when she went through something similar, which is not to say that she wasn't going through something just as valid that caused that. But the point is, let's not be purposefully obtuse when it comes to the difference between that and how Chappell Roan is expressing her discontent with fame lately, right? So the question is, honestly, maybe not so much is Chappell Roan cut out for celebrity, but instead, why do we collectively insist the problem is always the celebrity and not us? But I don't know. What do you think?